All right. So first things first, like I said, we are back from the midterm, from spring break, and we are going to first and foremost cover the remaining question on the midterm. We went through all the hypotheticals last time, one by one. So we're not going to do any of those. We're going to jump straight to the final essay. This should have been hopefully a pretty easy essay to tackle, given that this case was actually decided in a Tennessee court right after I made this essay and everybody turned it all in. So hopefully, even if you didn't know what to do, you just Googled around a little bit and you found something. All right, so the first essay asks, the essay asks, at present, many states have a proposed bill banning drag performances, claiming the content to be obscene or appealing to the prurient's interest and therefore inappropriate for children and other audiences. All right. Organizations around the country are mounting legal defenses to allow these performances to continue in LGBTQ+ spaces such as drag bars and at Pride. Using all your knowledge of the First Amendment, do you think an injunction filed by the ACLU or other organization will succeed? Why or why not? What rules or other information do you base your argument on? What do you think are the likely arguments of either side? And how do you think the current court will rule? So let's break this down. We know we're in First Amendment land. What does that mean? What are we looking at as far as whether or not this is going to fly by the First Amendment? What are some of the rules? Go ahead, Victoria. Freedom of speech. So yeah, we're concerned with whether or not this infringes on our freedom of speech. What do we know about regulations that appear to infringe on speech? Go ahead, Gracie.
There must pass the Miller test.
And please remind us what the Miller test is.
It's a test that determines whether the speech here meets the criteria of being obscene or appalling to the party's interest. And it's that acronym, right? Science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So remember, this is freedom of speech. And remember, they're trying to regulate a kind of content. So this is a content-specific regulation, which means that what's required? If we're regulating someone's content, in addition to the fact that we got to pass the Miller test, what else does the statute need to have? Lorena? I got you where you're going. Michaela, what were you going to add to that? Yes, you're both right. It means we need to pass strict scrutiny, which asks, are we limited in scope? And is there a substantial government interest that we want to hide? Now, that's going to be all part of the breakdown for 4. But what, again, this is part of the obscenity test, which is the argument of why these can be regulated. So in this essay, you would need to first discuss, first and foremost, these are attempting to regulate speech. We don't like when the content of speech is regulated. And for a content regulation, specific regulation to pass, it needs to pass strict scrutiny. Strict scrutiny says, is this limited in scope to protect a substantial government interest? What would be, in theory, the substantial government interest? Again, remember, you're going to have to argue for and against. So right now, this is mostly our for arguments over here, or in support of the law, and here is our against the law, and here is support of the law. They're going to argue first and foremost that there is a substantial government interest in what? Protecting children. And how are they going to argue that it is narrowly tailored in scope? a great question. We don't know. They didn't tell us. They did tell us that they were doing it, or that they didn't feel that this was protected speech. Why? I have it written on the board on the other side, and it's the Miller test. Yes, because it is obscene. Which the other side is gonna say, all right, well, we have a test for obscenity, and it fails the test. But this is gonna be the argument in sport law. We have a substantial government interest. This is strict scrutiny. We can pass it. I don't really know what the argument is for how it's narrowly tailored. I don't know what that would be, so someone would need to think of something if you're gonna defend it. The essay called for you to, but I would hope you would acknowledge at some point, either you would find one, if you don't have one that you want to share with me right now, or maybe you would just acknowledge there doesn't seem to be one, so this is probably where the test is gonna fail. But yeah, this scope question, because doesn't it also prohibit, where does it prohibit speech? What's the problem with where it prohibits speech? Public space. Yep, first of all, we're in public spaces like parks where pride is held. That's a problem, right? What is it otherwise regulated then? The bar. Is there supposed to be a child in there anyway? No.
I guess too, we'd like them to.
Yes, so sometimes these are open to minors, so that could be part of their concern, but did they limit it in scope to just this? To just public spaces, like at Pride? No, they went way out here and did LGBTQ bars, and really, pretty much any LGBTQ. Or what about, drag library hour? That happens in a lot of places, right? Also, lots of other places that we see drag. Where else do we see drag? What is drag? Isn't that racist? Go ahead, Victoria.
Do you want to define art like from whose perspective?
That is a great question.
Because to me, drag the style of makeup that I feel like women were like really on this so some like politicians have said when it's a man wearing makeup. Like there's very broad definitions. Like when I think of drag, like I think about like the big thick eyebrows, big hair, stuff like that. But it's not the specific, I guess.
Yes, so originally the term drag came from the acronym dressed as a girl, which used to refer to traditionally only men who wanted to wear women's clothing for one reason or the other, either for performance solely aspect or because of a gender fluidity identity, or lots of reasons, just to express themselves as a part of performance art. Yes, Lorena. Yes, yes, exactly. So then that was what it originally meant. And the modern conception of it comes from very much like queer ballrooms. And the ballroom scene, does anybody know what ballroom scene is? Yeah. Someone tell me what queer ballroom scene is. What? Yes, voguing. If anybody watches Drag Race, that's where it all originally got started, was in the 80s and 90s. Madonna's Vogue was literally about this underground scene, this underground movement of dance, of queer expression, of gender fluidity, of gender expression and gender identity. And drag came from that. But drag as a concept just literally refers to like, one, a performance art. It can also refer to, as Lorena said, people who are just dressed in opposite clothing, which we would definitely include the Shakespearean plays in, or who else, who's very famous for dressing in drag and making tons of movies about it? Every single one, right? So are we not allowed to play a Tyler, under this bill, would we be allowed to play a Tyler Perry movie in the park? So then are we limited in scope? Because we haven't even defined what drag is, have we? Or what we mean by it. They just said it's obscene, But remember, the Miller test says, okay, well, does it appeal to the prurient interest? What about drag appeals to the prurient interest?
It depends on your beliefs.
It depends on your beliefs. It could also depend on your own gender identity. It could depend on your own sexual orientation. It could depend on what the performer is even doing, right? A lot of times, who's actually been to like a drag performance or Pride or something like that? Okay, a lot of you in here. So a lot of you might be familiar with the fact that at drag performances, are all of them scantily clad?
No.
Do all of them dance to a certain kind of music, whether that's hip hop, rap, whatever? No. No, and in fact, if you've ever watched RuPaul's Drag Race, one of the best lip syncs of all time was to a spoken word. It was actually it was between Monet Exchange and Jinx Monsoon doing a spoken word to a film. They were actually performing a lip sync to a very long monologue in a film about the night the light went out in Georgia, fully dressed in like church women clothes. Does that appeal to the prurient interest? What about that was sexually charged? So again, the argument a lot from this area of the law is pointed very much at, we're protecting this government interest in protecting children. We're acting as, remember, the patriae. A lot of times we use that when we're talking about the First Amendment and regulations that we want to make. We are acting the parents. The government is acting as a parent in that regard and saying this is too obscene for our children. Did they say that about Grand Theft Auto? No. What about Oppenheimer? What about literally any other film outside of the LGBTQ genre? We concerned about whether or not it is obscene or too much for children? Joshua, go ahead.
There was one part that I was outside of the LGBTQ. It was 13 Reasons Why.
13 Reasons Why. Yeah, we were very concerned about that with the children. That is true. I remember that. But also, what does 13 Reasons Why depict?
Suicide.
What else? Yeah, pretty brutally depictions as well. They are not at all. I watched up to the third season, I think, of that, second or third season. And I could not get past one particular rape scene of a young boy in the bathroom. That one still sticks with me. I can't get past it. That one gives me nightmares.
They took one out, the one in the bathroom,
Mhm.
the room.
Yeah.
They took that out.
I'm glad. That was one of the most, that is one of the most violent depictions of sexual assault I've ever seen in a film. But did we see any legislation come about that? No, just about this particular one. So then I think the Supreme Court or the Court of Tennessee's appellate court did strike it down for the exact same reasons that we have discussed here. This is clearly a content specific regulation. You are attempting to regulate queer or LGBTQ speech. And in order to do that, you need to pass strict scrutiny. You need to have limited in scope. This is not limited in scope at all. In fact, it is extremely broad, which means we have an issue of overbreadth. And why do we not like overbreadth? What's wrong with it? It is too vague, that's right. What's wrong with things that are too broad or too vague? They are hard to enforce. They're also hard for us as citizens to know where's the line. Is the line, can I show a Tyler Perry movie in the park? Or if Tyler Perry himself shows up, is that where the line is? Where is the line? And if you don't know, and you can't be properly informed and act as a citizen, then the government has a huge issue with it. The Supreme Court has a huge issue with it. And also citing a substantial government interest. Okay, yeah, it's for the protection of children, but we absolutely did not limit it in scope whatsoever. We gave it way too far of a reach. And even assuming it was obscene and we have a substantial government interest, we ask ourselves, does it appeal to the prurient interest? Sometimes, sometimes not. And even if so, even if we assume yes, does it have a literary, artistic, political, or scientific value? Do drag performances have a literary, artistic, political, or scientific value? Artistic for sure. Artistic expression. If anyone's ever watched a lot of, I know Drag Race can be very silly and very funny, but there's also a lot of very poignant things discussed. Like there's an entire, there's a series, or excuse me, every episode now ends since the 2020 election, or sorry, excuse me, since the 2016 election ends with a campaign to vote. In addition to the fact that like an entire episode was called Trump the Rusical, in which a parody of Trump's time in office was done. So does that not have political value? And when Lorena was talking about people in Shakespearean times donning men were the only ones allowed to perform, does that not have literary value? Right? Absolutely. There are way more arguments on this. And so absolutely an injunction would succeed. An additional thing I would want you to talk about that we didn't get into too much this semester is generally injunctions are only there if are only granted when it's very obvious. Courts don't like granting injunctions because essentially it's asking the court to do something before an issue has happened. Courts don't like to do that. Remember, we have that whole issue of mootness and whether an issue can be decided if an issue is ripe, that the court can actually act on it if it's justiciable. And an injunction says we don't want to wait for that to happen. And normally those don't get granted. Why didn't an injunction get granted in this particular case? So an injunction was granted and the Supreme Court of Tennessee affirmed it and said, yeah, we're just going to go out the gate and say this is unconstitutional. We're not waiting for people to be arrested for this. Why did they do that? No, it's going to happen, Victoria.
I mean, I feel like normally what I know about like not just Tennessee, but other states in the US, pushing a lot of like anti-LGBT laws, and like on top of that, this being the way they like worded it was very broad. I feel like they saw like they had a very strong argument to
Yes.
and
Yes. Absolutely. Definitely it was going to happen anyway, and they needed to do something about it. And when it's this broad and this big, it's a matter of time. It's only a matter of time. And at the specific time in which this drag bill was announced, we were about 3 months away from June. Why is that significant? Pride. So if they hadn't made this decision and issued the injunction, what would have happened to all the Pride festivals across the state? Canceled, or maybe all their performers arrested, right? And do we want families? I mean, has anyone been to Memphis Pride?
Yeah.
I've been there a lot. Not exactly a non-family friendly place. Like, yes, you will see people walking around scantily clad. You will also see an entire gaggle of children running around in rainbow colors, right? Lorena, go ahead.
also like something I put on my end, despite having to be concerned with justice movement.
Yes.
Clarence Thomas, kind of what we mentioned in the previous lesson, where they're not huge fans of that big corporation. So whether they did, support this, pass the bill, it was.
I think there's a lot to that. That is the last question on here. What are the likely sides and how do you think the court will ultimately rule? We know how the Tennessee court ruled. And if the Tennessee Supreme Court was like, yeah, this is very poorly written, the Supreme Court of the United States is probably not going to be like, you know what, we think it was great. We think it was excellent. Because then they're going to have to deal with federal legislation that comes along the next calendar year that essentially addresses the same thing. It's never going to stop. And like Lorena said, the idea behind conservative interpretation of the Constitution is, again, not to be politically conservative, is a conservative interpretation, meaning we don't go more than what the law allows us or what the four corners of the document allow. And the First Amendment is a very broad sweeping thing that says you can talk and say what you want about what you want, and generally when you want, so long as you're not basically disrupting someone else, causing a scene, making fighting words, being obscene, something like that. And they don't really have a great argument. There is no argument that the other side has supported. So if the other side, it's one of those that like Justice Alito may not like drag performances, and he probably will never attend one in his life. Same with Clarence Thomas. But do they have a whole lot of actual jurisprudence to stand on? No. So it may be one where they just, it's a unanimous and they don't write an opinion. And I think that would, Lorena is right, that would be likely the interpretation, because this is very, very broad sweeping. Even if you don't like LGBTQ rights, it's very, very broad sweeping to say you can ban all these types of performances in any public space. That's very, very broad. Yes, Ben.
Do you think it'll be, or do you know if it's being rewritten to be more specific?
Not that I am aware of. The Tennessee legislature seems to be focusing a lot more on rolling back criminal justice reforms at the moment, and banning all kinds of trans health care. So I don't know if they're going to revisit this at all. since it was knocked down, like literally basically from its inception, or if they'll come back and try it again. I have not seen any news headlines that say we're attempting to bring this back. There have been a lot of headlines about the criminal justice reforms that they're trying to roll back, and some about trans healthcare specifically for children. And now they're reaching into adults where even people like me can't get hormones post hysterectomy. So it's gonna make my quality of life really great. Questions about this essay? You guys did a great job in discussing that. Michaela? If you, all I needed you to do is some kind of outline or something to show me that you thought about it and uploaded it to the day of the discussion, and you'll get your discussion points for that day. That's all you need to do. And if you do it by the end of today, I will give you credit.
Wait, like this specific essay.
Yes, this specific one.
If I go back and turn this one.
Yes, yes. 100%. So just turn this one in for that February, I think it's 28th is the day. Turn it in for that day that we did not come to class. Yes.
Wait, you said it had to be this question or any of the questions on the midterm?
I was not clear. So if you answered any of them, I gave you credit,
That's what I.
but I wanted this one.
Yeah.
It was a mass confusion time. I'm very sorry.
That's what I did. I just started saying, you guys turned this in. I was like, I don't.
Yeah, so if you didn't do it, that's okay. As long as you put something in that February 28th, I will give you your 10 points of credit that had to do with the midterm. This was the one that I wanted, but again, if you don't have it or you did another one, it's fine. That was mostly my fault. Yes,
Still
John.
doing the whole midterm or?
We've already done the other essays. It's on a recording from February 26th.
Oh, I know we did in the class, I just didn't know if you want us.
No, you don't need to type them all out. Nope,
Oh, okay.
nope, 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 nope. We're waiving the assignment. We're just doing it together. Yes,
We don't.
you don't need to submit any of the rest of it.
Wait, that's so good. Wait, what?
We don't need to submit any of the rest of the midterm. We've gone over all of it in class. I'm not gonna grade you on it,
So just this.
just this. It needed to be done or outlined for your discussion that day. That's it, period. Done. John?
Since you said we had extra time, can I ask something kind of off topic?
Yes.
What did you mean by the state's trying to place a ban on like transgender healthcare?
So trans healthcare is, has to do with your endocrine system and whether or not individuals can have certain, if you are going through puberty, a lot of individuals who are at the puberty stage will take puberty blockers in order to kind of keep their endocrine system where it's at so that they don't continue to so they don't continue the adult trajectory into a specific sex or gender that they do not feel is right for their body. For other people, it has to do with hormones to kind of not necessarily reverse the process, or it may put you at a more neutral place. So for instance, some people who are or have a uterus and want to take testosterone, they just want to take testosterone to get to a place where they feel, where they present, in kind of a gender neutral way. Whereas some people want to go full trans masculine and will start taking testosterone until the point in which they can grow hair, their voice deepens, and they go through the biological process of having what's called top surgery. So they're attempting, those bills attempt to ban everything from puberty blockers, which are usually accessible to individuals who are 11, 12, 13, 14. And anything to giving hormones, which are also given to people like me who have had surgeries that are unrelated to gender identity, and typically give us hormones to establish a higher quality of life. Your endocrine system is super important to your body. Your hormones feed a lot of what goes on and a lot of the regulation that happens in your body. Everything from temperature regulation to moods can be done or can be managed using hormones instead of antidepressants. And so what will happen is that people who have had hysterectomies or men who have had to have their testicles removed, let's say for cancer, they won't be able to get testosterone, they won't be able to get estrogen moving forward because the Tennessee state legislature thinks endocrine system and what it does is optional. So instead, things like temperature regulation will have to be controlled, won't be controlled, and things like mood disorders won't be controlled by anything other than mental health medication. Which endocrinologists hate because mental health medication should typically, even psychiatrist doctorate degree, mental health medication should be the last stop on the have we fixed all the other issues train. But now it will have to be the first go-to stop is to medicate someone's mental health instead of addressing their endocrine system if these gender affirming care bills are allowed to pass, because gender affirming care also refers to everything from like rhinoplasty, like if you're getting if you have a deviated septum, that's gender affirming care. BBLs, gender affirming care. So like all of these things are technically considered gender affirming care because they affirm who you want to be and they are optional for people. So if that's the case, then the Tennessee State Legislature is attempting to ban them.
So it's just like.
Yes.
So it's just like cosmetics.
Well, again, it's called cosmetics, but if you're a person who suffers from gender dysphoria, it doesn't feel like it's just
But
cosmetics.
it's like, that's how they would.
It would extend to covering cosmetic procedures as
That's
well.
how they would, the government would see it though.
Correct. Because it's optional. Joshua.
Tell me about it, BBL, I can't get to see that.
If it's to affirm your gender identity, no. If you just want one because you want a bootylicious, body, then that's fine. But if you want it to affirm your identity or you mention that at all, nope, not an option for you. Or if you, same thing, if you wanted to, let's say, you wanted your jawline to be a little more enhanced because you felt it wasn't masculine enough, that's gender affirming care. So now men can't get their jawlines
So
structured.
treatment itself is banned or like it won't be covered under health?
Huh? It won't be covered. It will all be considered optional, so it won't be. Your health insurance will not have to cover it whatsoever. And thanks to Hobby Lobby, even if you have an employer who religiously objects to your gender affirming care anyway, they don't have to pay for it anyway. That's a Supreme Court case.
They trying to do that with birth control too.
They've already done that with birth control. Hobby Lobby did that with birth control and the Supreme Court allowed it. The Supreme Court says if you are an employer and you have a real religious objection to providing this, you do not have to fund it for your employers, for your employees. You do not have to pay for birth control. We're not talking about abortions, we're talking about birth control. That was Hobby Lobby decision that was made before I was in law school. So that was like that was before 2013.
Older than I thought.
Yeah, it's very old. Well, in modern times, it will be old, 10 years old. But yeah, go ahead, Gloria.
In situations like that, it's very common, because I know, like, I have friends who take blood control now for just protection.
Yes.
More so because they have cysts or they.
Extremely painful PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, or they have endometriosis. A lot of people take birth control for those reasons, and you are allowed to deny access to those, even if you are not taking it for family planning reasons, or instead taking it for, again, body regulation, because we like to treat the endocrine and hormone system as if it's optional just because it has to do with gender, but it's not. Your hormones are not optional. Your endocrine system is not optional. It is a highly regulatory system, and it's what it does. Regulate your body. Yes, John?
I have several more questions.
Keep going.
How can the state do that? I mean, is that just for like state funded healthcare or if I have?
So they can do it for state funded healthcare, and they can make it a law that if any doctor provides it in the state, then they will be in violation of whatever code and subject to penalty. So that's also the bigger issue, is that they're making it a criminal offense for doctors to provide it. So it's not just that it's going to be hard to get in the state or hard to get around it. It's also that now doctors are going to be obviously terrified of providing it, or they will be facing a charge.
How do they justify it?
Protecting children.
I was protecting children. I'm 35 years old and I thought I want a fat ass. Those children are protected.
That's where they're gonna run into issues of it being limited in scope. So that's, I imagine, what a lot of the litigation will come down, and I imagine Tennessee is gonna fall somewhere along the lines of, we do think we should protect children, so no one under the age of 18 can make these decisions for themselves. But anyone over the age of 18 can. I think that's ultimately where the Tennessee court will come down on it. Which means unfortunately for trans youth or LGBTQ youth, they won't have a lot of options. And for most of my friends who have kids, they're already planning on moving out of the state. So I think we're about to see a mass exodus. Yes.
This is totally not what we're talking about, but can we talk about what was happening in Alabama with like the IVF stuff?
Yeah, the front.
Yeah.
Because this is related, yes. Today is just gonna be the Ask Legal Questions day. Maybe we'll get somewhere. So Alabama recently made a law that said essentially, if you destroy an embryo, you are guilty of homicide.
That was bananas.
So it did not say no more IVF in Alabama. What it said was, if you destroy an embryo, much like if you destroy an embryo during an abortion, you are guilty of murder. So that was the goal of it. But obviously, what does that mean? If we say you destroy an embryo, you're guilty of murder, and we're targeting it at abortions, what's the problem?
Just gonna wanna perform any IVF.
Who's going to want to perform an IVF? And what couples are going to want to try IVF? Because if you have, let's say, in one of the accounts that I follow, there are queer parents, 2 males, and they have several embryos waiting to be used. And at one point in the process, they had to get rid, or they chose to get rid of some that were had been sitting around for a while. And they got rid of 11 embryos. No one was using. They were frozen. They were sitting, waiting. Could have been used, may have never been used, but they went ahead and made the decision to get rid of them so that they could proceed forward with the rest of their lives. They decided not to do IVF anymore. Are they guilty of 11 counts of homicide? In Alabama, they are. And all the doctors and the clinic that got rid of those embryos. So what happens if you do IVF? And because I don't know if any of you know this about the fertilization process, but typically with IVF, you're going to try multiple embryos because realistically, they're not going to all take. And you want to try as best as you can to have multiple, or to have a pregnancy. So if you implant 5 or 6 and they all stick and you decide, oh, I'm not ready for 6 babies. I was only really prepared for maybe 1 to 2. I'm going to eliminate some of these attached embryos. And that is literally how doctors refer to it. We will eliminate some. So you're going to carry the 1 to 2 you have, but now you're also guilty of 3 to 4 counts of homicide. John and then Gracie.
I think I know the answer.
Yes.
I guess I just want to hear, make sure we're on the same page.
Uh-huh.
Why did they only target embryo? Why did they not suggest something else that involves procreation?
I think they targeted embryo because they could, because that was getting at the Roe versus Wade made a dichotomy between when a fetus is viable versus when it's not viable, meaning it can live inside the uterus or it can live outside the uterus or it can't. Roe made that distinction, essentially saying at any point pre-vitality, you can have an abortion because there's no interest. This law makes the embryo, it makes it clear that life begins at conception and that this is life. And so therefore an embryo is the same thing as a fetus. We're not making the distinction between whether it's vital or whether it's not anymore. So even if this embryo never could have become a baby, because let's say this particular embryo has a genetic mutation, which means that it's never going to become fully viable, still murder.
You know,
Miscarriage is now murder.
Oh,
So I'm gonna ask, like, if it wasn't.
Or it's negligent homicide. Go ahead, Gracie, you had your hand up there.
That's what I was gonna ask, like, if you didn't
Yes.
kill the baby itself. you
Yes.
decide.
You allowed it to happen, that is negligent homicide. Yes,
See, then that's also like, as an embryo, the first thing that work, so I need to consider it. In the sense of a living being, it's kind of.
why would we do, I'll say, yeah, because I think we're all getting to the point Michaela's muttering up here, is like, because the point is not protecting life, right? The point is to control women's bodies. The point is to control our bodies and what we're doing. Then,
That's the same thing with this.
yes, isn't it? To
It was
control
so
bodies.
broad, because the
So
point wasn't actually used to-
it was to control and make sure these people did not have space or did not have a place to go safely. Isn't that exactly what we're doing here with IVF?
Did you see the decision by the court, they were citing the Bible and stuff?
Yes, the decision by the court that upheld it cited the Bible. Not legal precedent, it cited the Bible. Joshua.
back to the whole miscarriage. So,
Yes,
so you said if you have a miscarriage, it's called negligent manslaughter or negligent homicide.
yes, negligent homicide.
So what if, so you're saying basically.
Or reckless, depending on how you behaved throughout your,
But then that goes
if
back
you did it, if you had a drink during your pregnancy, they might say you were very reckless, which is a higher level of homicide. If you just lost your baby and you did everything right, negligent homicide.
But isn't it possible to have,
Oh, 100%. 100%.
So then, and you just have a miscarriage because like the body just happens.
Yeah.
And you just get charged for that?
Yeah.
You're really gonna pursue it? So then that.
They have in Ohio already.
That's what it's like.
There's already been cases in other places that have tried this already.
So basically, they're basically talking about not to have sex.
because,
Not to have children, not to have life.
right, because all of these things go into the whole bill. That's,
Absolutely, crazy.
So you're telling, okay, like, say I didn't have anything to do with it, say I got hit by a semi truck,
Mm.
and I lost my baby, am I getting charged?
Oh, that's a great question. Who do you think is getting charged? Someone is.
The driver. Okay, so that,
Driver of the truck killed your baby.
make sure.
For sure. In that circumstance, they would for sure.
that's their fault.
That would be called transferred intent or transferred kind of, you can't actually transfer recklessness, which is why this law is literally so stupid, but they definitely will try, for sure. And they have already tried, to bring up, somebody asked that question, are they gonna do that? Yes, for sure, they have already tried. People are already being prosecuted for abortions. Go ahead, Victoria.
They also trying to law. I'm not really big, but everybody be trying to be able to, like, let's say like, if I used to get an abortion and I go to Chicago, but I live in Tennessee.
They are trying to make it
They're
a
trying to,
law.
like, pull up medical records from out of state and like charge you because you live in.
They're trying to make it a federal crime, because you can't make this a state crime, but you can make this a federal crime to cross the border to engage in conduct that is illegal. Just like the federal government could make it a crime for individuals, and this was actually why this particular brand of law exists, makes it illegal for individuals to cross the state border to engage in sex trafficking, prostitution, drug trade, or anything like that. So there's actually specific laws that say once you cross state lines with the attempt of, conveying someone for prostitution or conveying drugs, you have committed a crime. This would be the same. There are bills currently saying that if you are crossing state lines for the purposes of procuring an abortion, you are committing an offense. Yes, Miranda.
So like kind of adding, which is a question now.
Yeah.
So I'm originally from New York. If I go back home, end up getting an abortion, have to come back to Tennessee because I live here now.
Yeah.
School here. So then how would that go? Like, especially since I have that healthcare system and everything out there and they don't have anything here. But what if they wanted to pull my records? Would they be able to do that?
If there was a law that prohibited crossing state lines for the purposes of procuring the abortion, probably. And then it would be on you to prove in trial that you didn't cross into New York for the purposes of procuring an abortion, but because you were there originally and you just happened to procure an abortion wrongly.
But they would be able to prove that unless there was like prior documentation that you were pregnant before leaving the state there.
Yeah, they could. They would probably present that information that you were pregnant before leaving the state. Yes.
Well, it seems like, everything you're saying, there's like this bright red glowing sign that says like, how do we make it so we're controlling everything up until the exact moment that the man is no longer involved?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, how would, like, how would masturbation not be the same, like, just being produced? You gotta do sex.
Great question. This is like, I know everyone makes fun of Legally Blonde because it is very silly and like there are some things about it that are not accurate, but there's a very great scene in which she discusses this exact thing. And she was talking about a civil case where an individual was harassing the people that he had donated sperm to. And he was saying it was because he was so interested in being a father. And Elle Woods in her moment where she gets it, right? And everybody gets to see that she gets it. She goes off on this very long explanation of like why it wasn't. It was like, it was clearly he was targeting these specific individuals. Otherwise you would have followed all the other sperm that you donated, and you donated sperm for 5 years, like once a month. So if that was the case, and if you're treating every sperm emission like a baby, then why isn't every masturbatory emission considered reckless abandonment of a child? Why don't we do that though?
Because it's.
Well, it is stupid, but this is very stupid. So why don't we do that? What's the difference between saying it? What were you saying?
You can't see what it is.
You can't necessarily see that, Victoria.
It's white men, right?
It's a man.
Are they gonna make it so that they can't masturbate?
Vasectomy.
Or are they gonna make it so that they have to have vasectomies, or that they're responsible? Because here's the other thing, if it's illegal to destroy an embryo because it's a baby, doesn't child support needs to start then? How expensive is it to have a baby? Let me tell you, as someone who's trying, it is very fucking expensive. Very fucking expensive. Minimum of $10,000 if you cannot conceive naturally. Minimum.
Why are they not?
And depending on how many times of IVF you try versus, and then how long it takes you to get to the adoption, you may spend $100K before you actually get a baby. John.
Off topic.
Yeah, go ahead.
You and Dr. McKay trying kids?
Yeah, we are.
That's exciting.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Where's the store?
Huh?
Where's the store?
The stork called Trust. The stork is in the form of my beautiful surrogate, my queer platonic partner, who has been my best friend, and in my life since I was 16, will be our surrogate. So that's our stork. Arrives today, actually. Yeah. Very excited to start trying, or to continue trying. But it is a long and expensive process. So why isn't it considered reckless abandonment then, like we talked about? Or why doesn't child support start in utero?
I heard the state is trying to do that, like start child support.
So I will say that the states that are trying to do that, it's from women's rights groups who are like essentially existing in states like Tennessee that say, all right, fair enough, you're gonna make that the rule, then if babies are babies in utero, you need to be paying half of this ultrasound, half of these prenatal vitamins, half of these doctor visits, you need to be paying for half of it because this is half your problem. / responsibility, depending on how you want to look at it. Right? I think that's fair is fair, if that's how we're gonna do it. I would love to see that happen, but also, who is that gonna more often affect than not? I mean, yes, the guy, but what kind of men is it gonna affect more often than not? I mean, yes, straight men. Minorities. If you've ever been to a child support docket, it is full of men of color. There's not a single white man or white woman, for that matter, on the docket.
Will they be able to prove that this guy is the father of that child?
You can do DNA testing in utero.
They're not dangerous.
No. Not anymore. There are certain kinds of DNA testing that require a little more invasive procedures that can still be pretty invasive for the baby, but most of the time, no. We just need like we need a sample from the amniotic sac if we can determine within a reasonable degree of certainty who is the father while someone's pregnant.
Do you think the government would ever like ban abortions, like make it a law?
Yeah. I think we're very close to that. I think if number 45 wins again, I think we're looking at that personally. Other questions about the midterm, and then I'll let you ask questions about anything else, and we'll call it. Because who wants to talk about Doggett today? I don't want to talk about Doggett today, and you guys don't want to talk about Doggett today. Any other questions related to anything else that you have questions about, legally speaking? Oh, by the way, okay, before we're done, don't leave just yet. I want to talk about something off camera. It does have to do with school and constitutional rights, but go ahead, Gracie.
How do you feel about Rittenhouse?
That's what we're going to talk about off camera. Off camera. All right, but any other questions before we get to Kyle Rittenhouse? All right, then I'm going to stop the recording and let's talk.